Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all here today, elected representatives, senior public servants and members of the public. Our session today is with the States Trading and Supervisory Board, and in this hearing we will focus principally on the progress being made across key areas of its mandate. Our panel today comprises myself, Deputy Simon Fairclough, Vice President of the Scrutiny Management Committee, SMC member Deputy John Dyke, Deputy Carl Meerveld and former Deputy Shane Longley. Following this event, the committee will decide whether any further review activity will be commissioned. Turning to the arrangements for today, I can confirm that a Hansard transcript from this proceeding will be published in due course and that the event is being live streamed. Now, we'll aim to take a short break, probably at around 11 o'clock. Please can I ask anybody with mobile devices to put them to silent, as it is essential during our session that the committee is able to hear from our witnesses without any interruption from the public gallery. I now turn to our witnesses. For the record, please would you introduce yourselves, starting with Mr. Ford.
Alistair Ford, Head of Shareholder Executive at States Trading Group.
Simon Thornton, non-states member of STSB.
Fowler, also a non-states member of STSB.
President of STSB, and when we've finished, if I could just explain how the STSB operates, which might explain why we got the guests that we have, or the witnesses we have today.
Managing Director of the States Trading Group.
Yeah, obviously we have an STSB board, which is responsible for our overall mandate. However, we look after a large number of businesses, three of which we do not direct. We are simply the shareholder and try to be an active shareholder. That's Guernsey Post, Guernsey Electricity and Orony. But the other boards, which are not incorporated, we do act as the board of directors, and the STSB itself doesn't try to do that because it would be stretched too thin. So we've set up individual boards for each of the committees, and all of those boards are chaired either by Stuart Fuller or by Simon Thornton, hence the decision that they would be the best people to have before you today, because they know those businesses best if you've got detailed questions.
Thanks for that explanation, and we'll try and bear that in mind when we're directing the questions. But if you think that that somebody is better placed to answer a question than somebody else, then please do indicate that. Now, firstly, we have some questions in your role as shareholder in Guernsey Electricity, and I'd like to turn to Mr. Shane Longley.
Just a few questions on Guernsey Electricity. Security of supply is an issue which undoubtedly will be addressed in the Committee for Employment and Environment and Infrastructure's forthcoming electricity strategy policy letter. In the meantime, in 2020, the states agreed in principle the need for a second interconnector to France. The Energy Strategy Policy Letter timetabled Q4 2021 for the STSB to lay before the states the full business case. Could you fill us in on the current situation? For instance, how does any revised timetable match that for the Committee for Environment and Infrastructure's delayed Electricity Strategy Policy Letter? And has the business case been influenced by what you and Guernsey Electricity know about that strategy?
Well, we haven't until very recently know much about that strategy because, speaking personally, the first real insight I've had into it in public presentations in the last week or so, although, of course, I think both our officers and probably GEL have been inputting to it quite significantly. It would be foolish for us to come back and bring a business case for a second interconnector until the states have debated, we're told in the next few months, the electricity strategy, because it will, that's the policy lead. We will be doing whatever fits that policy direction from the states. Alistair, I should have explained as well, one of the reasons Alistair's here, he has many facets to him, but he is our main connection with the three incorporated entities, so Guernsey Electricity is one of them, so I don't know if you can expand on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, we understand from ENI that the electricity strategy is going to include 6 different options, if you like, for satisfying future electricity demand. And the different technology options, if you like, some of which will include a second interconnector, some of which won't. And I think the board and Guernsey Electricity has felt that it would be folly to spend a considerable amount of money on continuing to develop that business case for a second interconnector until we've got some further guidance from the states as to what the direction is going to be. That will come through the electricity strategy, we hope, when that comes to the states. And I think Ian and I are targeting December states meeting for that. That's not to say there hasn't been work going on in the background in terms of sort of, I'll call it a low-level work on developing up options, but developing that full business case, I think we said at the time, was going to cost several £1 million, because you can imagine there's a fair amount of survey work and technical and engineering design work that sits behind developing it, and there was, if you like, a reluctance to commit that expenditure until we had clearer guidance through the electricity strategy on what the state's preferred blend of generation options, if you like, would be for the future.
So does that mean inherently there's going to be delay? Because if the states 2 years ago took an in-principle decision to at least look at the business case, and now you're saying, oh yeah, well, we're going to wait for the electricity strategy, and then we'll start on it because it's expensive. Inevitably, say the states did decide to go for
an interconnector, the business case is actually starting from scratch. So there's going to be like a 2-year delay. I mean, I can understand the reluctance to spend lots of money if the state is going to decide not to go ahead with it. But it does mean that the states having made a decision, in principle decision, it's going to be a delay, isn't there?
Well, some work has been done. I mean, it's been a fairly extraordinary couple of years since that decision has been taken in some ways. It's really only at the beginning of this year that we got rid of the whole sort of COVID situation. But yes, there will be some delay, but it is a question of whether you want your ducks in a row or not. We could have charged ahead and as Alistair said, spent quite a lot of money to try and avoid delay. And if only 2 of the 6 scenarios painted in the draft electricity strategy, who knows what the final one will be, show an interconnector. So there are 4 options that don't. But Simon, you wanted to come?
I think it's where's the cart and where's the horse, and to invest many millions in a business case when you haven't got the key stake in the ground, which is what is the strategy against which you're building that business case. I think it would have been foolhardy to have done it the other way around and invested many millions of pounds of customers' money in a business case that may well not be needed. The key policy piece and much of what we do in the STSB is taking the policy lead from others. That electricity strategy is absolutely key for those investment decisions, because that'll drive the framework for that business case that we make.
The further point is, you've said the states have made a decision in principle. I think if we were convinced that the states were fairly overwhelmingly leaning in that direction, then maybe it would have been a risk worth taking. I think anybody that sat in this assembly will have picked up a large amount of cynicism over the possibility of a second interconnector, and therefore it would be a heck of a gamble with that money. That's not to say that the second interconnector isn't the best option. It may well be, but it's by no means, or we've approved it in principle, it's almost a done deal. I think the jury is very much out.
Yeah, okay. Well, we could talk about this, I'm sure, for a lot longer, because it's an interesting topic. But I better move on, as you've got such a wide mandate to cover. Last year, responsibility for determining Guernsey electricity's tariffs and prices was transferred from the Guernsey Competition and Regulatory Authority to the states by way of the STSB. Since then, we have seen the first increase in tariffs for 10 years. In these uncertain times, there are understandable concerns about increases in unit prices once the current contract with EDF expires in a few years. Can you give islanders and businesses any reassurances on the future?
There's several questions in there. You're right that the responsibility transferred. In reality, the responsibility was given to somebody for the first time, because what we were being told by the regulator in the past is that they really weren't geared up to consider any applications. So there was a regulatory void, if you like, or lacuna anyway. Obviously, you're right. It's the first underlying increase for nearly 10 years. There's been a couple of cost pass-throughs relating to things like the breaking down of the cable, and it was absolutely vital in our view to invest in the infrastructure of the island. It is badly in need of significant capital investment. We're reaching the point where people who want to put in energy-hungry facilities are being told, not in this part of the island, mate, we don't have the infrastructure to serve that. And that could be very desirable things like combined heat and power units or whatever. As for giving absolute assurances for the future, I think it is very hard. The world is a more uncertain place. Who knows whether the current spike in energy prices is temporary or permanent, or heaven forfend that they could go up even further. We're being threatened with nuclear war at the moment. I mean, to try and, in those circumstances, guarantee what will happen in 2025 or 2027, I think would be foolish. What I will say is that the hedging that GL have done, if energy prices return to anything like normal, and I'm not saying they will have been a very prudent and successful strategy. But if you're asking for guarantees for 4 or 5 years' time, I can't. Again, Alistair, you're probably closest to GL.
So taking this year by way of example, GL has got around 87% of its imports hedged, and at the moment you're looking at, in broad terms, a price per megawatt of around £60. 60 euros. The forward markets buying electricity in Europe at the moment are well over €1,000. So on the one hand, that shows you how successful Guernsey Electricity's hedging policy has been. But as those hedges unwind over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, unless the markets correct themselves, there is going to be a significant challenge there. Yeah, absolutely. We can't shy away from that.
Yes, please. Just going back to that, because I mean, we've just obviously had presentations on the future electricity strategy from Environment and Infrastructure and a consultative document published, which has highlighted a lot of details. I want to try and drill down on what kind of quantum of increases we can expect, because basically we were told when the 9% increase came that we were obviously passing on costs for unanticipated events, but also passing on costs for the increased operating costs and underinvestment in our grid. We are told that our grid currently needs serious capital investment to bring it up to speed and to enable things like the charging of electric cars at home, and that fast chargers in some areas can't be installed because we don't have the grid to deliver the electricity. Then we also know that in 2024 you have your generators 1C, 2C, 3C and 4C are all coming end of life in 2025 and 1D in 2030. So even to maintain the grid as it is now and the security we have now would require replacing those at hundreds of millions if you look at them in aggregate.
Can I come in on
Yeah.
that? I think a lot would, how much capital investment on the generator side takes place would depend on two things. One, whether the states want to maintain N-2, which is their current level of security, means that if the two biggest generators go down, we still have enough to meet the power requirements. That is a very prudent approach, but a very expensive approach. And it almost goes back to the question of the second interconnector in a way. If we had, I think one of the reasons for the incredibly prudent approach is because when you are reliant on a single cable, there's a need to have belt and braces when you're actually on island generating. Jersey, for instance, don't even meet N. I think they have about 80% of N because they have multiple cables and they feel able to do that. I can answer the rest, or do you want to finish?
No, I would like to finish the question.
Yeah,
certainly. So basically we've got an option of, if under the proposals, the 6 different options that were presented to members, you've got a minimum capital investment of 320 million if you just want to maintain what we're doing now without putting a cable into France, going up to 520 million for capital investment if you wanted to go for the most expensive option out of the 6. Whether we are replacing 5 generators and spending 100+ million on that, or spending in the original report an estimate of 96 million for the cable to France, but I believe that's now nearer to 120. The current estimates, or I've been reliably informed it's gone to that level. We're going to be spending hundreds of millions just maintaining the network we've got, whether it be through an additional cable, and those costs or replacement generators. We need to invest in the network itself. Our hedging runs out in 2024, and currently it's very difficult to get any hedging at all, or it's extremely expensive because hedging companies are pulling out of the market because of volatility. Volatility dictates hedging price. And our contract with EDF expires in 2027. And if we look at the last couple of years of energy pricing, in 1st of August 2020, the wholesale price in France was 36.76 euros per megawatt. 1st of August last year, 2021, it's 77.4 euros per megawatt, so it doubled. And as of today, or no, as of the 1st of August this year, it is 492.99 per euros per megawatt. So we've seen over 1,000% increase in 2 years, and a doubling even before the Ukraine war started. Therefore, what kind of price increases are we likely to see in 2024 and 2027 when our hedging expires if we are putting the full price of all of these strategies, plus the hundreds of millions, onto the consumer in the electricity cost per watt?
There's several different answers to that. The first is I don't know. And there's no doubt that local consumers have been very protected and cosseted and sheltered from what's been going on in the energy market, and we can't guarantee that in the long term. The second one is almost an environmental one, because there's the cost on the world energy markets, which EDF, despite the fact that they may not be using gas or whatever to generate, will want to match, I guess. Those negotiations are not going to have here. The final question is over the price of oil and whether the states in those circumstances would prefer to generate on island, because of course if it gets to the cost to buy in, at the moment it's a lot more cost effective to buy in than to generate on island. It puts up our costs if we do it. It is conceivable that we would reach a point where it was considerably cheaper if oil was below the typical sort of price of energy, and that would be but these are going to be directions that the states are going to have to decide, and this is what the electricity strategy is all about. We are overseeing an operator here. We're certainly making decisions like you need to invest more in the grid, you haven't invested enough in the grid, and giving instructions to do that. But these big macro things, they are strategic decisions for the states to take, and E&I will be bringing the proposals on that, and we're going to be the servants and taking the lead from the states.
Okay. Could I come in with a supplementary? Just that obviously in the UK they've decided to support energy costs, and if the rampant inflation that you're perhaps predicting that could come about, then it may be that the states have to decide whether they intercede in that costing structure.
I fully understand that
right?
the states
and
concede, yes.
I mean, Deputy Roffey's been sort of, in a way, gentle in the sense of we've had 12 years of a strategy void from the states. So electricity, almost every meeting I've attended, because we meet with them quarterly, they're saying to us, when are you going to decide on the strategy that you want us to follow? So the states are in a way bringing this to themselves, that we are in the precarious situation you're bringing.
I absolutely agree.
Right. And we are not policy determinant. We receive policy, as does Guernsey Electricity. So I would encourage you as states members that when this electricity strategy comes before you, that you make a decision, whatever that decision is, because we're not very good, I'm afraid you're not very good at making decisions on big picture stuff. And this is a big picture stuff.
I wouldn't disagree. But what I'm trying to establish here is the kind of quantum that we should be creating as an expectation, either for the public or of the government, if it has to subsidise it, in 2024, 2027, when these points come up. So, even without inflation, we've got the capital investment requirement.
I can only speak to you in terms of what's happening in the energy market at the moment. I'm not going to get drawn into the cost of the different investment options, but in terms of what the pricing looks like at the moment, as I mentioned earlier, Guernsey Electricity roughly paying about 60 euros per megawatt. If it was buying in the markets today, that would be over €1,000. When we met with them, in fact, in August, our regular quarterly meeting, we looked ahead to 2025 and what hedges were available to them at that point. And looking forward to 2025, their advisors were telling them if you want to hedge at the moment, the number would be in the region of, I think it was €350 per megawatt. But even that obviously is substantially higher than where we are today. And at the moment, Guernsey Electricity are holding firm and are waiting on the advice of their advisors in those hedging areas, sitting tight and waiting to see whether there's going to be any stabilisation in the market. But it's very hard to envisage an option that isn't considerably higher than where we are today.
And your question about how much would it cost the states to intervene, we can only talk about electricity, of course. Energy costs, if they wanted to intervene, would be across the board. So, But it is how much is a piece of string. And as I say, for energy, one very difficult decision that would have to be taken is if oil is returned to a relatively normal price, but it is, I doubt that would happen because the energy market is interconnected and therefore people would be resorting to oil. But it could well be that that's by far the cheapest option. And that would be an interesting environmental debate in the States.
Yes, I think actually the question's been answered with the fact that hedging out to 2025 would need to see a sevenfold increase of our electricity. We're looking at potentially hundreds of percent, not tens of percent.
But the advice is not to hedge, which suggests that the advisors believe that actually when we arrive there, on the balance of probabilities, the price will be less. But that is no guarantee that it will be, yeah.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, a short follow-up question, stemming from something Deputy Parkinson, I think it was, said in the Assembly almost en passant a few weeks ago, that EDF themselves and France are currently very short of electricity. Their half their nuclear plants are currently down, although I think coming back on shortly, that there might be an opportunity of doing some sort of deal, or that EDF have suggested doing some sort of deal whereby they buy us out of the contract we've currently got, which would mean that for the next couple of years we'd have to use our diesel equipment. Is that something that's been explored, and is it something that should be put to the States? I mean, do we have the scope for a large windfall profit that we should look at?
It is being explored. It is at a very sensitive stage at the moment, and I don't think it would be sensible to go into any more details. The SDSB is approaching it very much with an open mind. You're right that Mr. Putin has put the whole of Europe in a situation where they are going to struggle to have enough energy this winter. And against that backdrop, we have some, amongst our generating plants, some of it relatively modern, sitting doing nothing, and that opens up an interesting discussion. But I would really be reluctant to go into any detail. I don't know, Alistair, what you can say, if anything, on.
No, I think I need to repeat that there is definitely an option and a possibility there that Guernsey Electricity are exploring. I think it's important to remember, though, that the diesels run during the winter anyway. It's then that we rely on diesel generation at some point during the winter, and there is some spare spinning capacity, if you like. If one of those engines is on, there's still, if you like, some residual that isn't used, and that's the first opportunity to look at perhaps offsetting. But then the question is then whether we use more of the diesel generation that we have.
We might see a proposal.
So there is, yeah.
I'm not sure a proposal will come to the States. I think we need to move. We would move quickly because we're talking about the winter months, and although it's gorgeous at the moment, winter is not far away. I think we would be mandated. I'm sure we would talk to other interested bodies, but I think the whole business of putting a policy letter together and taking it forward would probably take too long.
Well, I also don't, if I may, I'm not sure why the States would need to consider a shareholder matter, which is why you have a delegated committee to carry out that mandate. I think the challenge for the shareholder would be whether there's a conflict with policy, with any decision it makes, and if there is, then our duty as shareholder is to then go and discuss with the policy committee their ability to flex policy. The purpose of delegation is to try to stop matters of operations being on the State's floor. If there's a big policy decision to be made, it could be a big environmental policy, what have you, then we'd have to look at how do we to make that happen. But you can't carry out commercial negotiations on the floor of the States. We have to be able to, as shareholder, move within the frameworks that are given to us, and that's through our mandate and the role and function of the shareholder.
But I can assure we are approaching this without dogma, with an open mind, and we will do what we think is in the best interest of Guernsey.
Recently, a private company received a very substantial state's grant for the rollout of fibre broadband, which obviously keeps user charges down. So has something similar ever been considered for capital projects in our incorporated bodies? I mean, the interconnectors must be a classic case. Has that ever been discussed with P&R or considered by the board to apply for a grant rather than passing anything on to
the business case that hasn't yet been done? I think we would expect the user to fund regular ordinary capital investment, which is why, regrettably, we've had to put up the cost of electricity so they can invest in the grid. There will come once in a generation, maybe a strategic decision where there will be a question mark of whether the state should put money in, and the interconnector might well be one of those, because I think the burden on the consumer, particularly if it comes at a time when prices are higher anyway, and if it's being done for security reasons and everything else. So I wouldn't rule out at all asking that. And of course, it's not just actually the incorporated businesses. When we realised that we needed a new whole package system, which I know you had quite strong feelings about, and felt that the user charges couldn't reasonably afford it, we did. Although we only used less than half the money in the end, handed most of it back. But going back to your direct...
I'll just stop you there, because I've got another question later on, if we ever get to it, about the difference between funding the incorporated bodies, which seem to me to be quite disciplined, and the unincorporated bodies, where...
I think most of the unincorporated bodies are also disciplined, but I'll wait for your question. But coming back to the interconnector, I think that is the kind of once-in-a-generation strategic thing where we would certainly open the question about whether or not it should be all user-funded or whether the taxpayer should contribute.
As well as having a role as regulator, the STSB represents the shareholder of our incorporated bodies. In the absence of even a quasi-AGM, questions that might be put to the GL board by shareholders are directed at STSB. Most recently, about executive remuneration. Given the dual roles, is it the STSB's intention to review governance of Guernsey Electricity and identify any further efficiencies?
I don't think it's, I think people misunderstand. We are not there in any way to represent GEL. We are the shareholder that holds them to account. We are the ones that are telling them at the moment, and the other incorporated businesses, that we believe we need more openness around executive directors' remuneration. We certainly have AGMs, and the purpose is not to act as an adjunct to their board. We are there as a shareholder to question the board and to get best value. So I think somehow people get us mixed up maybe with the old electricity board, which sort of, or the old post office board, which was sort of running the business as well as being the people holding them to account. We are not. We're there to hold them to account. But Simon, did you want to?
I get slightly bemused sometimes. The states have delegated the functions and role and their shareholding in these companies to the STSB. So an AGM of the company and the shareholders happens annually in all companies, in all of the incorporated companies, and the shareholder, who representatives, are there in those meetings. The shareholder isn't each individual states member or the 63,000 people on the island. So those are there. And I think, interestingly, when it was previously under the Treasury and Resources Department, which was pre-2016, the National Audit Office carried out an audit into the ability for a committee to be able to dedicate the time to that shareholder role. Did it really give the diligence? Now, that reported back that it wasn't able to, actually, because of the breadth of the work it has to do. But the STSB is able to provide much clearer focus on that company. So there's an annual AGM, formal AGM, there must be for the company. We meet with each company 3 other times a year, their shareholder reps to hold them accountable. And I can assure you it's not always the most comfortable of meetings.
I can assure you it's quite robust.
And even between the...
I absolutely believe all that. It's just, I was concerned about the perception out there that it's a bit kind of cosy. Is that the right word? No, I think that's unfair. I'm sure you do challenge the board rigorously.
The regulator role is pro tem.
Yeah.
So when the states decided that we needed a regulator in place, because basically Guernsey Electricity couldn't raise their prices in the way that was appropriate and needed, almost in relation to Deputy Mervelt's questions. The expectation is this energy policy will determine a new regulatory environment, and therefore it's a pro tem arrangement that it's come to SCSB. So yes, we're having to be very careful that in discharging the regulatory role is different to discharging the shareholder role, and we make sure those are quite separated within within our meetings, and we've got professional advice that we've engaged with in our regulatory role. But I can assure you that the shareholder perspective of all of those companies, and we haven't included Jamesco, which is also a fourth company that we do the same with, it is quite robust.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that leads into probably my last question, which was about regulation. How do you see regulation of Guernsey electricity going in the future? As you said, it's
I don't think it'll be of Guernsey electricity. It will be of the electricity market, and there'll be multiple players. So that will be the difference, I think.
Right.
You know, we may have a number of generators or a number of importers, and it will be regulating a market.
Yeah.
Now, I'm slightly cynical. I've read in the draft, and I know we're all talking about a draft that hasn't been made public yet, but the draft electricity strategy, warm words about keeping it simple and proportionate and cost effective. I have a nightmare scenario that in that situation you might get to the point where the cost of regulation is really burdensome, and it's only one person picks that up at the end, because you make charges against the various companies that are being regulated, but it gets passed on to the customers. So if my biggest fear is not whether we go for an offshore wind farm or an interconnector or whatever, is that we end up with a UK style and therefore UK cost system of regulation in Guernsey. But that will be, I think, for economic development to work on rather than us. So that's outside our remit.
Because you don't want the pendulum to swing, which it has done, hasn't it, between claimed excessive regulation, which is really expensive and incredibly time-consuming, to too light a touch regulation. You've got to get the balance right, and you're saying that's what you're working towards with economic development and.
Well, no, it will be economic development that will do that. Because
economic development, yeah.
The shareholder of one of the parties to be regulated, we have to be careful. But I have to say it's been both expensive and non-existent over recent years. And Guernsey Electricity had to pay a fairly significant fee to the regulator, and yet really haven't had the ability to adjust their tariffs. And to be honest, if they'd started adjusting them 5 or 6 years ago in real terms, it would have been a far gentler process, but that wasn't able to happen. But that's history now. We've got to go forward.
Okay.
Is that fee continuing to be paid despite the current arrangements?
That's we're in the middle of a negotiation about what the appropriate fee is at the moment. And there's been an exchange of letters, and we will see what comes out of that. But we're quite clear that we should not be paying for more than the regulator is doing. Now, they still do have the sort of whole competition law part, which has not been removed, so they do have a role to play. They're not, but it is in the middle of a negotiation at the moment, or exchange of views. I think maybe better than negotiation. Yeah.
Just one final question, I think, on electricity.
And very brief one.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, in the UK, under Ofgem regulations, electricity generation company is not allowed to own the distribution network. They have to be separated. Obviously, in Guernsey, with our scale, we've had that in the past. But if we are bringing more people to the market, is it under consideration separating GL into two entities, one that owns the network and then buys from suppliers, and another GL company, effectively, that will be the generator and be one of the customers of that, or one of the suppliers to that network?
Of course, that's possible, but I think it will bake in a lot of additional costs. There'll be a lot of, we need one of these in this company, we need one of those in that company, only need one across both. So I think that is going to be something that will just be addressed in the energy strategy. But from the purest point of view, and on the scale of, that's the thing, the scale of the UK looks absolutely sensible. Some of these ideas, when you import them locally, well, you try and adopt what's trying to be done, there needs to be a different way of doing it if you're going to avoid those costs.
But in the draft strategy, there is a recommendation that a level of unbundling, as they're calling it, will take place. The exactly which bits get unbundled from which is still to be, if you like, explored within the strategy, but the concept of unbundling is there.
But two totally different companies, Guernsey Electricity Distribution and Guernsey Electricity generation, I think will be quite a costly.
It's a function on unbundling.
Just that something needs to be done in the competition regulation. Because there are concerns locally that, and the reason it's unbundled in the UK is to make sure that the distribution company doesn't show a bias to the generation.
I think that's for E&I.
Or even ED with their regulation. E&I drawing up,
I think you will definitely get an opportunity to consider that as a part of the package that comes forward with the electricity strategy.
I totally agree. There must be no advantage to the generation part of Guernsey Electricity than there will be over other generators.
Good.
Thank you for that. It's a subject we could talk all day about, of course, but we do need to keep moving on with an eye on the clock. We'd like to move on to the Development Agency and indeed harbours, which is obviously a part of your mandate as well. The first question I'd like to ask is about the local planning briefs for the harbour action areas, because a lot has been hinging on those. Is the lack of those briefs hampering progress?
Yes, I think, Stuart, you obviously live and breathe this as chair of the Ports Board.
Thank you. I mean, within the land that is allocated to the Ports Boards, there are commercial opportunities that are going wanting because of the inability to effectively submit planning applications for a variety of things, and the planners cannot look at those because of the lack of the local planning brief. So there was one particular example to do with the boathouse some time ago, that restaurant on the quay. The work that we would have liked to have done there to increase income was not possible because of lack of local planning brief. And also, it is understood within the marine, particularly the visiting marinas, that the facilities that we're able to offer to visiting yachts people is substandard, and once again we're unable to provide those facilities because we can't put plans in for those. So the local planning briefs are a hindrance. It's not stopping the functioning of the ports, but it is a hindrance to our ability to exploit the commercial opportunities.
And the DPA are quite clear that they cannot really finalise or start work on those planning briefs until the macro decision is taken about future commercial ports provision. So it is really a question of getting ducks in a row here, which is why we came early in this term with our proposals in that respect.
Absolutely. I think when the states last debated this, there was talk about the local planning briefs being completed within 18 months at that time. Is that still your understanding about when they're going to be completed?
We're involved in those discussions, and I understand that there will be some ideas coming to the states again about the future harbours, and the decision that might be made then will start the clock ticking of the 18 months that are. So until that decision is made, the 18 months doesn't start.
There was an amendment from the DPA in that debate that said that these plans would not be produced until 18 months after the states had taken the strategic decision.
Yeah. And I'd like to come on to the next decision that the states are going to be faced with on this in a moment. I'm just focusing at the moment on the Development Agency. Now, I know that you're not the Development Agency, but obviously there is some overlap in terms of harbours, as Mr. Faller's already suggested. How supportive of the Development Agency is STSB, and what concerns does the board hold regarding the progress of that entity?
Well, we certainly don't oppose the idea of a more arm's length body looking at the opportunities on the East Coast. However, I have to say that our own consideration of possibly moving to a more commercialised approach as far as the ports are concerned has pretty much been put in cold storage for the time being, because although there will be work going on with P&R to look at the whole concept of commercialisation, but in relation to the ports, until we know what we will continue to be responsible for and what the Development Agency will be responsible for, it's quite hard to work up that piece of work. So, and I suspect it's going to be a year or two before the Development Agencies really got their feet under the table. They haven't even recruited the members beyond the chair at the moment. And as you say, the local planning briefs will be quite key. I'm sure they'll be looking to feed into those, as will we. But it does look like there's going to be a hiatus for a couple of years before we really drive on with the work we'd like to.
Do you believe, as was suggested by one member of the States Assembly in a question earlier this month, that there could be a conflict of interest between your role, Mr. Faller, on STSB and that on the Development Agency?
On the Green students, I'm sure you'd like to answer that, but can I give my own perspective first? First of all, we're really asking the wrong people, because Stuart was already the chair of the ports when the Oversight Committee decided to appoint him as chair. At the moment, I don't perceive that there is any conflict. Can't put my hand on my heart and say that down the road that won't develop. And if that happens, I think Stuart will have to make a decision. So that's my perception, but there certainly doesn't seem to be one at the moment. But Stuart, you want to?
Well, I think there's a little bit too much attention to one person, because ultimately the development agency will be a team of 5 or 6 directors, to call them that. So therefore, I don't think one voice will be either dominant or overly persuasive within a group of 6, because the intention is to appoint people that have got the skills requisite for that job, and they won't be people that'll, if you like, do what they're told. Because certainly the intention that I would like to have is that we have people that are robust enough to have their own mind on those matters. Secondly, much as we are here as a group representing STSB, the real work is done by Simon and Alistair and the rest of their team. And the intention is the agency will appoint a chief executive and a finance director and people that will be actually doing stuff, because ultimately the chair and the board are there to oversee the work of their staff. So to have one person that is supposedly directing what goes on, I don't see that to be the case.
And
the same way as Peter doesn't direct everything that happens within STSB, because it is a collegiate approach, and I would expect the same. So I find the sort of attention given to one person's point, I find quite strange, quite honestly.
I think that's right, but I think it was only right that we gave you an opportunity to air your views on that, given that in the States there was a lot of talk about yourself, and it didn't seem right to some extent that there was a lot of talk about you and your role.
Quite strange that those same people haven't bothered to lift the phone to talk to me, which is the way the States seems to work somehow.
Mr. Elliott.
If I may, as with the ultimate executive responsibility for the ports, well, when I hear the word conflict, I immediately assume there's some sort of physical conflict, and I struggle with that. The States has directed that the development agency will be set up, it will develop a mandate, and it happens to run Guernsey Ports, an unincorporated trading asset. It's not currently commercialised within a framework, and we know what that looks like. But that doesn't mean that there are 2 different businesses being set up, each competing for the same. Because what we're trying to do will be the best for Guernsey, not the best for Guernsey Ports or the best for... So what government surely wants is what is the best for the East Coast. So when it comes to Guernsey Ports and the portfolio that I look after within that remit, and the little red line around the assets and car parks and roundabouts and boathouses, if there is a transfer from the States decide to transfer some of that property and land that they own to somewhere else's books, that's fine. I'll carry on operating what I need to operate. I think that the challenge will come is where is the best place for pieces to be, but there isn't an inbuilt inherent conflict, because surely the objectives will be the same. Corporate structures may define as we go down the line. I think it's also worth remembering that the STSB rotate. So of the 5 voting members on the committee, 3 who are politicians, 2 who aren't. Simon and Stuart are those. They're elected by the States for those seats, and they rotate out. So Simon joined us, I think, last year, Simon, replacing John Hollis, who was the first. And Stuart will be leaving the States by resolution 1 year before the next election. So that's 2024. So effectively for the next 18 months is the period where you end up with a crossover of potentially individuals.
And then the other thing which I think you will already understand, Deputy Fairclough, is that the States will be making all the decisions. So ideas will be coming from the agency and put before, first of all, the oversight group. The oversight group take it to PNR, and PNR take it to the States. So the way that individuals within the agency will have direct input is through putting ideas for the States to consider.
Thank you. I'd like to move things on by picking up on that point, really, Mr. Fuller. Now, in February 2022, prior to the States debate regarding the establishment of the Development Agency, Deputy Roffey, with regard to harbours, reiterated STSB's disappointment regarding the failed future harbour requirements proposals, saying that you are pleased that P&R has indicated it plans to return to the Assembly with proposals in the near future, which hopefully will provide greater clarity, unquote. Do you believe that clarity has been achieved to date? And if not, and I think that you don't, from what you've already said, what are you expecting is going to be brought back by P&R?
Well, P&R, we understand, is going to bring back a policy letter this year, so in the next few months. I haven't yet seen it. I hope it will lead to, really hope it will lead to a fairly definitive decision on future commercial ports provision in Guernsey, because, as we were speaking earlier, until that happens, the local planning briefs won't be done for the harbour action areas, and a lot of the stuff is in status until that can happen. It will be, and I've forgotten what it was relating to another issue. Stuart said that maybe cynically that the Assembly may have difficulty with big decisions. It will be a big decision, but I hope that it will be taken, whatever it may be. I mean, I have obviously, and we have as a board, clear views of our preferred route, but a decision needs to be taken whether or not is our preferred route or something else, because at the moment the whole situation is constipated, and that's just in nobody's interest, really.
And so, sorry, just before you come in, Shane, and so do you expect that the first that you will get to see of that policy letter as a board will be a sort of final draft stage, or?
I'm hoping to see it very soon. I think
perhaps I can come in on there if I could, Deputy Roffey. Because of the other role in relation to the Development Agency, I have seen early sight, and I do know that it will be going to STSB formally well before it gets into this stage.
I'd expect that.
So it's a very clear expectation to have that, and I believe that could be as early as in the next 10 days or so.
No, in some ways, Stuart's answered my question, but it was that STSB came to the States with 7 combinations, which the States couldn't decide which of them to go for, and then it was all passed on to P&R. But all the expertise, surely, is within the offices of STSB, the Ports Board. Yes. So P&R have taken over this, in effect, project, and you're saying STSB doesn't know what they're going to come up with, but are your officers allocated to helping out?
Well, I think it's reasonable if I could come in. Yeah. There have been many conversations, and Colin Array is sitting behind us here, and I know that he and his team have been consulted, and that much of the work that was done by a consultancy called Jacobs, which were largely was engaged by the Ports Board to do much of the work, I know that many of that information will be contained within what's going forward.
And the way the civil service should work is that civil servants are not owned by a committee. Of course, they work to that committee on a regular basis. So in just the same way, some of our officers from the airport are helping ED with their deliberations about whether or not to have a runway extension, and I don't know exactly what's being said because they're servicing ED in that circumstance. I'm sure that our expert officers relating to the port, Colin, the harbour master, or the other officers down there will be feeding in. I hope they're feeding in. If we see a policy letter from P&R which our officers say, good Lord, where did this come from, then I think there would be some concern, but I don't expect that to happen. But at a political level, I haven't yet seen what the preferred option is. Presumably there's going to be a preferred option for P&R.
There might even be an 8th combination somebody's come up with.
Well, one of the I don't think we need to speculate on. I think one of the expressions that were being used that States members like to get their crayons out and design things on the table. And I don't think we want to get into that speculation.
We just need to make a decision, basically.
That's all we want. Yeah.
So just pick up on one point, Mr. Longo, that you picked up around the role of the civil service in supporting. We're very lucky, or I'm very lucky, to have a plethora of experts in their fields because of the businesses they run, whether they're airports, or ports, or water, or waste, or even States Works, and indeed in incorporated companies like electricity and Aureni. If you want expertise in their area on this island, that's where they reside. So we do have a duty when we're with the civil service to support any committee with a mandate in developing its proposals. That is key to our code of impartiality and objectivity. And we try to do that by making sure that when the board make decisions on their own mandate, there hasn't been an undue influence anywhere in that advice they're giving. So when the airport staff, experts in aviation matters, are able to give advice, they're able to do so unfettered by any other oversight. And that obviously requires quite a strength of character from our own civil servants who have to carry out those dual roles. But we do it very carefully.
And restraint from the politicians. They're not trying to influence what advice they give to other sets of politicians. But we do exercise that restraint.
I'm aware that we're focusing a lot on process here, and I'm keen to move on to some things that are clearly in the public interest. But just picking up on the harbour issue, is the much publicised and needed, we're told, essential maintenance programme of the harbours going ahead in any case?
Yeah. Perhaps I can answer that question by going a little bit more broadly than you're posing it. We've concentrated a little bit on the agency. We've also concentrated on the future harbours. But you may remember there was the state's debate where the policy letter that we took as STSB back in June last year was amended quite, and there were propositions that came out of that. One was to set up the development agency. One was for P&R to come back with future harbour proposals. The other element of that was for us to come forwards with a pool marina, if you remember, which was done through an amendment. So all of those pieces of work are in train. So it's not surprising that P&R are bringing back future harbours because the state's so resolved. So therefore, we are working, and in fact, yesterday we had what I think was our 13th or 14th full morning session on the new pool marina, much of which will address some of the issues about the ongoing maintenance work that is needed within the state. So by almost filling the pool of the harbour there, we will be doing some of our maintenance work that is required because it's needed in order to do that work. Now that policy letter is not yet written. However, we will be engaging with stakeholders starting from October the 11th. So there are some public meetings being planned for a variety of stakeholders. Over the course of the week prior to that, in fact, we've got our first meeting tomorrow, bringing the plans to STSB because it's a subgroup working on this. We go to P&R next week on Tuesday, and the various committees that are involved, economic development, environment, infrastructure, etc., and education because of Castle Cornet, over this next week. So it is very live. It's a piece of work that's in train. And over the course of October and November, we'll be engaging with the general public because of the work that is required is of such a significance that planning approval will be required. And we've managed to negotiate a carve-out with the DPA that work can be considered, even though the harbour action areas are not fulfilled, not ready yet, providing we do a public consultation exercise. So this 2 months of October, well, from about the middle of October to middle of December will be that 2 months of public consultation, so that we are able to then go to the state in March of next year with the proposition, well, on the assumption that all the parties support it, because obviously it's not fully baked yet, but on the assumption that it gets supported, it should be before the House in March of next year, which will be a proposal to fulfil the resolution of the states to bring forward plans for a future marina there.
But while that will pick up some of it,
yeah.
There are maintenance issues, this issue with the QE2 Marina Gates, there's issues with the outer wall. We are, I think it's fair to say, cranking up the capital programme because we feel there's been underinvestment in the harbour over the years. How it's financed is a really interesting issue because pre-COVID, the ports and the accounts run together, the airport and the harbour, just about washed their face, but probably didn't really generate enough surplus to have the capital investment that was required. At the moment, we're running at about 80% of pre-COVID passenger numbers. Freight is pretty much the same at the harbour, but passenger numbers across the two ports are probably about 80%. So what was a fragile situation has now become a significant loss-making situation. And if there's not a return to pre-COVID level travelling, and there may be, it may exceed it, but who knows? But there will be an issue about whether the ports can continue to carry out the capital investment that they need purely out of their own income stream. Because of course we could put up, we could put up airport and harbour fees by 20%, but I think we'd have ED and P&R saying, what are you doing to the broader economy by doing that? So there is a strategic discussion to be had.
Deputies Dyke or Meerveld, did you have any other questions on the Pool Marina project that we're on at the moment?
I have one question, a quick question. With the Pool Marina project, will that include improving the facilities for the incoming boat owners?
Yeah, the current scheme, because of the problem with the local planning briefs, includes effectively facilities within the pool. So there'll be floating facilities. And this is familiar in some marinas. It's not in all marinas. But what we're hoping is that by the time the process has gone through with Development Agency and the harbour action areas, that we will be able to build on land by the time we're completing the scheme. So the current scheme is showing it with floating facilities, but we're hoping that by the time we get to that point of needing to order those, we'll be in a position where we can make proper planning applications for the appropriate place for that.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't have any further questions.
Any further questions on the ports?
Can I just ask, because they brought up the subject of the ports holding account to non-legal interest in it.
Has it ever been considered, because it's 60 years old, I think, this year, it was established when I left primary school, but Guernsey's a very different place today, yeah. Is it still valid to lump the airport in with the harbours? There's cross subsidies that have been involved in the past. I remember when I was on TNR. There's a lack of transparency, and I'm just wondering whether it would be clearer and maybe easier to incorporate one of the or both of them if the accounts were split, basically.
There is a transparency. I think the accounts do show the split accounts, but even though they are amalgamated. To be honest, if we're talking about what commercial land around the harbour, for instance, is going to stay within the port's operation, possibly some, I think all of these questions are open. But at the moment, I think both the harbour and the airport with the reduced demand, it's not a question of one's hugely profitable and the other one is benefiting. They are both struggling by the fact that we haven't gone back to the pre-COVID level. You wanted to comment?
It might just be worth noting that there is nothing in the port's holding account after COVID. It was stripped, the cupboards were stripped bare.
Yeah.
And it's a legacy of accounting. We may come on to that later when we talk around the investments needed in the unincorporated assets. But but it's all around transparency. The numbers are the numbers, and they're the same pieces.
I've
never understood why
$6 million in there when COVID struck, and it was the first $6 million that had to be spent in underwriting the losses.
I'm sure the cupboard is bare, but anyway, for another day maybe.
Okay, well, that seems like an opportune time for us to take a break. So we'll aim to be back, if we can, for as close to past as we can. But thank you for that. To this second half of the Scrutiny Management Committee public hearing with the States Trading and Supervisory Board. Deputy Meerveld, I'm going to turn to you to pick up for the first question of this part of the session.
Thank you. The creation of the STSB during the last machinery of government revisions was intended to bring improvements. Has this occurred in your view, or do you think that the STSB functions could be done under PNR or ED? Could it be absorbed into a committee mandate rather than a separate entity? What's the justification for the STSB?
These things are subjective, but I think we touched on it perhaps in the first part, that the attention that we can give to the... Let's split it into two areas, the incorporated and the unincorporated. I think we can definitely give far more attention and be a far more active shareholder than TNR, and it would now be PNR, but it was TNR back then, could do with their enormous... I mean, our mandate is big, but it's big and it's all focused on the trading operations. That is our focus, that's our raison d'etre. And what I'd like to invite maybe Simon and Stuart and now the other Simon, who's been more recently involved in, is we have been able to bring in, you're seeing here all the people you know are on STSB, but on the various boards we have, the committees, we have brought in very often for absolutely no cost whatsoever some incredible expertise from the island that really help deliver that supervision. So I think it's been an absolutely major step forward, and I think although I have no intention of being on STSB in the new assembly, I think it would be a retrograde step not to have, I'm not saying can't be tweaked or changed, or maybe bring in some more outside people and fewer politicians or whatever, although the states didn't like that when that was suggested. I think a body of this nature looking at states-owned businesses is a good idea. But the different perception will come, I guess, from people working in the on the civil service side. So I'll bring in Simon.
As I say, please tell me to shut up if I overtalk, but a bit of a reflection on the STSB, because it was set up in 2016. It brought together a raft of what were administered things. I can't really describe them as businesses. It brought together the dairy from what was Commerce and Employment, the lottery from Culture and Leisure, the shareholder role from Treasury and Resources Department as it was, and then Guernsey Water and States Works, which sat under what was PSD, and then after it all formed, the Guernsey Waste was formed as a new entity. And when they were brought together, the idea was to try to bring a level of oversight of a greater discipline over what were trading concerns, generally not general revenue funded, I'll come back to that, to start to instill a greater level of focus and discipline by a dedicated committee for that purpose. Now, a couple of observations for that. That was why originally it was set up, is to have at least 2 states members and at least 2 non-states members. It wasn't prescriptive. That changed in the 2016 term. I think a request was brought to change the structure. But the one thing I found as the civil servant who was given the task of leading this was that very quickly there'd been an expectation that returns would be delivered. There'd be some sort of financial gain by these assets. But what I found was effectively I was given in the unincorporated businesses a bunch of well-run but administered departments, states departments. They fought for capital with everybody else. So your dairy, for instance, didn't get the investment it needed, and probably, if I'm honest, probably didn't get the focus it needed. It was a trading business. If it generated a surplus, that was great, but it wasn't treated in the same manner, in the same mindset. The ports are administered. I mean, back in 2016, you still required PNR approval to spend £250,000. Now, when it comes to airports or harbours, you don't get a lot of toys for £250,000. So there was a need for, I think, that level of discipline that was needed, but there was an expectation. What I did find was the early days, and I'm sure Stuart, who was one of the first non-states members and has been the continuity member on the board so far, we realised there was a role that we had to fulfil between the Beswan public, the public interest, and, if you like, the commercial mindset. And we had to look after it, but we still needed to put in a sense of discipline. And so we tried to emulate the idea of clear directorship and oversight of those unincorporated businesses. And we set up, using the rules of procedure, committees. subcommittees, populated and led by members of the STSB. So in this case now it's Simon and Stuart. But critically, we also went out to Guernsey to ask for business people if they would come and help us and join us. And we now have on those boards, so the Guernsey Ports Board, and we call it a board because it should emulate a board, we have volunteers who give up their time. We do on waste, on works. These are people from industry, from business, who give up their time. And they do so, I actually think, because they can look at it as a trading business. They can try to optimise it as a commercial concern within a government structure. So that's been a real strength of oversight and governance. It's allowed us to tap into a market of people who are helping us out. The challenges we face, we've returned in excess of £50 million to general revenue over the past 6 years. But unfortunately, we weren't in a good position before we started that journey. So we needed investment in ports, investments in the dairy. But I would say that after only, and it's only been 6 years, including a 2-year of a pandemic, keeping those businesses going, I think that discipline that we've been able to provide across unincorporated and incorporated, that level of oversight is a massive portfolio. I mean, it's 10 companies, 200 million of turnover across the piece, but we're able to provide that oversight because of the structure we have. I happen to have been the lead officer in the Treasury and Resources Department for the shareholder role, and my sense is we can give far more focus, far more discipline because of the mindset of looking after trading businesses for the STSB than you can when it's just part of another mandate. It's a different mindset that we have to provide. And that's my view after 6 years of it.
Was it a conscious decision not to go the whole hog and incorporate more of the trading bodies? Or is it something in progress? Or is it something you decided you weren't going to go there? It was working fine with your quasi-boards?
I wasn't there when that, I mean, it's still under consideration, I have to say. It's not off the table. But if you're asking historically when the SDSB was set up, I wasn't there where Simon can probably.
Shall I cover it, Stuart? Shall I cover that to begin with?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think initially, to put it bluntly, if we had 25 things to do on day one, 1st of May 2016, worrying about incorporating was probably the last thing we needed to do. We first of all needed to try to get understand the business, understand their needs, understand what they were before you have a conversation around incorporating. I think now there is that question is being asked now, is there greater opportunity for incorporation? And there's big questions. What does that bring in terms of value and oversight? And we are, the committee, both the States Trading Supervisory Board and the Policy and Resources Committee have been in dialogue around taking forward a piece of work to consider what may be possible, and officers will be meeting in the near future to start to deliver on in terms of reference for that. But again, you've got to look at the outcome you're trying to achieve rather than for its own sake. And to be honest with you, you have to incorporate something, you have to have a business that a board of directors can carry out the full fiduciary duties over. So it needs to be appropriately capitalised, etc. And as you know, some of our businesses probably aren't.
Dr. Thornton, Mr. Fowler, is there anything you'd like to add to what Mr. Elliott said?
I'm happy to do. Simon, do you want to go in first? Or?
No, you go. You've been here longer than I have.
In speaking to people, the Chief Executive of the Post Office, Mr. Smiley, and the Chief Executive of the Electricity Board, they would say that it took 12 years to convert what was a states-run entity with a states board into a fully functioning, appropriate business, because methods, processes were embedded within their senior team because it wasn't to clear out people. And it's taken that long to get a good functioning company. And I think both of those companies, in fact, Origny particularly now, with some changes we've made in there, are all businesses that I'd be very proud to be involved with. That they are superb businesses. Over the course of it's 6 years, we've been doing our best to convert states-run entities into fully functioning businesses, and I think we've achieved a level of success within the constraints that being part of the states has offered. And there is no doubt, in some cases, terms and conditions of employees and staff can sometimes reduce the opportunity for change that you might like to bring into. And when we might find ourselves wishing to appoint senior members within those teams, the pay levels that are expected within the state's departments, the grading levels, mitigate against maybe getting out from the marketplace. Remember, these are businesses, and most of the people who run the businesses have come from the civil service, should we say. So when we're looking to find new people to lead them, we are thwarted to an extent by the arrangements we've inherited. So we will come to a point in time where the improvements that we can bring in by adding in, shall we say, a commercial direction, encouragement. I see much of my role as almost being a business mentor as much as anything else. We will get to the point where we can't take any further improvement, and that commercialisation, if the state so wish, would be the next step. And I don't think moving it to P&R would accelerate or decelerate that. I think those are something that have to be done. I think the goodwill that we've achieved, that Simon's mentioned, of bringing in a range of expertise, I think because the STSB is that little bit different, we've been able to actually ask people, will you give your time for free? I think P&R would find that more difficult. I'm not certain, but I just feel that it would be more difficult. So we had a meeting yesterday morning. It was quite an intense meeting over a range of complex investment decisions. And we had a guy in the room who has attended a range of meetings for free. He then spent the afternoon analysing the spreadsheets and coming up with a better spreadsheet, more fit for purpose, and submitted it to the team by late afternoon. Did that totally through his own endeavour and expertise. And if we'd gone to a PwC or whatever, it would have taken several weeks to engage with them and quite a few pounds to pay for that. Now, that isn't happening every day, but because of the environment that we've managed to build within the teams, we can. In fact, he was asked, would he do that? And he said, I'll do my best to get it done by this evening. Right? Now, that is the type of thing that we can do. And I could tell you about the other companies. It just happened that was yesterday, where we're able to pull in resource that the states don't realise what free effort that they get. And Simon and I get paid $8,500 each. A non-exec director at the post office gets paid more than we get paid. And I can assure you we do quite a bit more time and effort. How do you bring that goodwill in? I think it's been a response to how it was set up and giving Simon and I votes at the table. Therefore, we are considered to be the equivalent of the elected members, the deputies. But the thing we can't do is go to the states and take policy letters. So the combination of having both, in my mind, works excellently.
And the reason Simon's been, this Simon has been quiet, that Simon's been quiet, is that he's actually chairs Guernsey Waste, Guernsey Water, States Works, all of the ones you haven't really asked about yet. But on the broader perception of how the STSB works.
I think we all view these businesses as what I'd call social enterprises. So they're here to serve the needs of the island in a way that the States has directed. I think there are good arguments for incorporating the ones that haven't been incorporated, to the extent that they are termed businesses. I question whether we'd all question where Guernsey Waste sits in all of this, but the process of incorporation will allow the boards and the STSB to do things it can't currently do. But it doesn't mean that the purpose of the enterprise will change. It's still here to serve the needs of the island.
I mean, just to give a classic example, at wherever, States Works, Guernsey Water, whatever, businesses will normally negotiate their own pay levels with their staff. That is simply imposed by the centre. I'm not sure if it's still going on, but until very recently, if one of those entities wanted to appoint a new type of manager at above a certain level, even though it may save money elsewhere, if Deputy Mahoney said no, it couldn't happen because anybody above SO1 had to, have his rubber stamp on it. That is not how a normal commercial organisation would work. So they are still, we're trying to make them as commercial as we possibly can, but as Stuart said, it is within constraints, and we can't operate the unincorporated businesses as a normal business. And then there's the issue of, are some of them businesses at all? They're trading entities. I mean, Guernsey Waste is a classic. Of course, we want to trade and we want to make it as little loss-making as possible, efficient as possible. But it's not there really as to generate a profit for shareholders. And it's not, in fact, if anything, it's trying to drive things the other way. So that's an interesting concept.
Thank you for that oversight and insight. I'd like to move things on and turn to Deputy Dyke, who has some questions about Guernsey Airport.
Okay, thank you. Right, the airport. There's quite a lot of concern amongst the general public, I think, about the management of the airport. And I'll go into a few granular points. It's an important piece of kit from the purposes of both tourist business and our people. And at the moment, I would say the airport, and people have said to me, it's looking rather shabby. We've got a lot of rusty metalwork along the walkways, panels missing. We've still got the old COVID partitioning is all up, and we don't seem to have a cafe. It's giving us scruffy, shabby impression. Is something going to be done about that? Those issues?
Well, can I? First of all, we're in the. I agree with many of the things you've said. I think the construction of that was awful. I think the design of it was awful. And I really can't understand why the previous Board of Administration employed an architect who had never designed an airport before to build our airport. Right? Right. Yeah, right. So a lot of the things can't be maintained because of the way they were built in the first place. So I think the design was poor. So we've got problems with the roof because the contractor has never come back to repair it and maintain, do it well in the first place. I could go through a litany of the stuff that we found by investigating it, of the poor construction that was achieved in the first place. So we are living with an airport that was poorly designed and poorly constructed. Unfortunately, we don't make a surplus. And the only way that we can make a surplus is to overcharge for using of it. And that is something which we've touched on before, that there's a balance between what you charge and what is good for the economy. So we, in a way, operate the airport with one hand slightly tied behind our back. That doesn't mean to say we can't improve things. The reason why we still have the petitioning up there is because the decision hasn't yet been made that COVID will not return. Now, if that is made within the states, and we're directed so to do, we will take it down. But currently,
that's not our decision.
It's not our decision. We are working under that constraint. So that means that some of the things that we would want to do there are inhibited by that lack of decision of future direction. We are about 9 months to 12 months into a master plan that we've commissioned through a consultancy firm called ACOM, who are well known in the airport industry. And we are close to making decisions on various things, one of which will include the reconfiguration of parts of the airport to which you refer. Because I've already said the design was poor. We've got relatively small amount of space airside and a plethora of space landside. It should be the other way around. So therefore, when you get the airport full, in departures it's crammed. You can walk around outside on the landward side and find two men and a dog. Maybe, well, the dog wouldn't be in the airport, sorry. a few people having a coffee
Could be a guide
upstairs.
dog.
We need to redesign the airport. Unfortunately, that will mean investment of money, and we are not making surpluses. So at some stage, we have to make a very good business case for an injection of capital there. So fully understand the points you've raised, and they need to be addressed.
In the interim, though, is there enough budget to do things like, you know, sand down the paintwork where it's all rusty and put the panels back and that sort of minor thing? Because presumably any major restructuring of the airport is going to take quite a lot of time.
Yeah, one of the troubles is, as I say, the design. Those bottom rails of steel, first of all, were done they weren't in stainless steel. They're almost sitting in the water of the apron, and therefore they are rusting. I mean, Shane's nodding because he knows exactly what I mean. It was badly designed. Yeah, badly designed. It didn't cope with the fact that it was put into a permanently wet environment. So therefore you're getting water coming in underneath, it then evaporates, hits the tiles, and it rusts all the time. It's a fundamental mistake of design, but the cost of demolishing it all and replacing it, because we could do what you're suggesting of de-rusting, put more Rust-Oleum on it, repainting, and within 2 years it'll be exactly the same as it is now. Yeah. It's a design-led problem.
Simon.
I think it's. I mean, we've got to remember that the airport is very scarce of funding. To put it into perspective, 11 million-ish forecast revenues this year against a operating loss of around 3.5 million. So where's it going to spend its money? It's got to spend it on aviation safety and meeting the regulation, because the last thing we can afford to have is an airport not working. So that is making sure the lights are working, making sure the security's working, making sure all of that really material stuff that allows planes to come in and go is complied with. And that takes a huge amount of investment and maintenance. Just count the number of light bulbs on a runway. I once counted all of Gatwick's runway lights as a junior engineer. There's a lot of lights on a runway. So the investment decisions by the Ports Board, and they're all over it like a rash, have got to be focused primarily on ensuring the safety of the assets and the deliverability of those assets. And yes, we are now in that place where a bit of rust doesn't necessarily get prioritised down, and it does look scruffy, and it is difficult, and I think you just need to look at the dairy to see the situation we're in, from a legacy of poor investment, a legacy of not dealing with the maintenance when it was needed back in the day, or not specifying the right material. But the decisions that the management team of Guernsey Ports and that board are having to make regularly to make sure we have the safe aviation against those financials, that's the tension we face as in terms of a trading entity.
But I do understand your point about it being a gateway to Guernsey, and I have to say that every time we meet with P&R, including a few weeks ago when we went in to talk about our budget for next year, I make the point that at the moment, that we couldn't afford the capital investment we really wanted to pre-COVID, that now we've got a hefty operating loss effectively, and a decision is going to have to be taken, because if we want to get rid of all the rust, and we want that done through user charges, it means, 20-30% increase in landing fees and whatever, which will have an impact on the broader economy of Guernsey. So I keep raising this, that we do need a grown-up conversation about how we go about it, because we can't carry on under-investing. I quite agree with you, Deputy Dyke. We do have to be seen as a modern, successful, vibrant territory, and these things are important. Simon's right that at the moment, until that dilemma has been resolved, then the things that are absolutely operational and required will take priority for the scarce money we do have. But we do need to have that conversation.
Right, thank you.
But you say, Deputy Roffey, a decision is going to have to be taken. Who's going to take the decision and when?
To be honest, I think the P&R and ourselves, when we have the discussion around I'm not saying this can only be done through incorporatisation, but I think, for instance, if we're not going to go down that route, or if that's going to be some years away, then I think we need to have this conversation with them very soon. And I think it is us and P&R that really have to lead that conversation.
Okay, I mean, talking about decisions that need to be made, Alderney Airport and runway, I'm sure that a number of people were hoping that they would have seen proposals come forward for Alderney Airport by now. It's something that there's been a lot of talk about for a very long time.
Policy letter is ready to go. It's been delayed slightly because it's been decided it would be, and I'm delighted it would be a joint policy letter between ourselves and P&R. Originally we were going to bring it ourselves, so that's put it back a month or two. I think there were P&R got in mind November now to debate, which means it will come out fairly soon. Yes, it will be a decision for the states to take this year.
What do you make of the fact that, according to one media report today, Guernsey's Treasury lead has said proposals to extend Alderney's runway could cost £26 million, which includes £12 million already allocated in 2019 to rehabilitate and widen the surface?
It not only includes the 12 million that's already been allocated, it also includes money that would needed to be spent anyway during the lifetime of the project on the terminal building up there, which is basically a shed that's returning organically to the earth, and the fire station as well. So what one has to do is look at the whole lot. A runway has a life of about 20 years, so you need to look over the next 20 years of which option will be the most cost effective. And it may be counterintuitive, but we have come to the view, and so will P&R, that the extension, despite the higher capital cost, will actually cost the taxpayer of Guernsey considerably less over that 20 years than just, and we do have to do something because under the 1947 or 48 agreement, we have to maintain an aerodrome in Alderney, and the current runway is really reaching the end of its life. So the add-on cost, really, we believe, with the revenue savings, will come out as a considerable saving to the island. But that will be a judgment for states members. They'll look at the evidence. And to be honest, all we do is operate the thing. The finances are really P&R's responsibility. It's them that got responsibility for the 1948 agreement and making sure that it's properly implemented. So if the states decide, no, we just want to keep the current runway and refurbish it and rebuild it, then that's what the SDSB will do happily. But we believe, and our recommendation is, that there's cost savings by extension.
Okay, so can we expect that policy letter, then the joint policy letter, to be signed up to by all of the members of P&R and SDSB?
I don't sit inside the P&R meetings on a regular basis. My impression is I'm not aware of any significant dissent inside P&R, and I'm certainly not aware of any dissent inside the SDSB. So my prediction is yes, but whether there's going to be some rogue member of P&R I'm not aware about who says no, you'd have to, I think, ask them.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Dyke, did you want to come in with some questions on Aurigny?
No, I had a few more questions on the airport, actually,
Okay.
whilst I was at it. Going back to security then, the new screening machine, as I understand it, that cost about 16 million in capital to set up.
Which screening machine?
The new large baggage handling.
That cost about 5 point something. Sorry, you're the expert.
Yeah, about 5, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that's the one that we see. I understand.
You don't see it. That's the point. That's
Right.
for the whole baggage.
Right.
If you're talking about
The carry-on baggage.
the carry-on baggage, no, it's not. That's the whole baggage. The carry-on baggage, the costs are a fraction of that.
Right. Okay.
A few 100,000, I think we're talking about.
No, the big machine in as you walk in and you put your carry-on
About
bag.
600, isn't it?
Yeah, for two.
Yeah, 600,000, those two units. Yeah.
Well, there's one new unit, isn't there?
They're both
New. One is a entirely different style where you don't have to take your liquids or your electronics out. Is that about 400,000? Sorry?
I think one was 300 and one was 250.
Okay, so about 300,000, something like that, yeah.
So are these machines, are we finding they're working? I know there have been some outages.
Perhaps we can give you a broader answer,
could
if
you?
you wouldn't mind. The technology, as you're going through the area where you're searched on the left-hand side, which is the larger of the model, is a very recent style of baggage check, and it's got a a return with the tray, and it is able to, it can allow you to leave your laptop and your liquids and all your stuff in one tray. Unfortunately, it is not approved by the CAA for the whole of the system, any system, whether it be Gatwick or wherever, to be totally that style, because it is new technology. So we have to have a blend of new technology with old technology, which is why we've got two different units. We could have decided to have two of the old type, which means you do have to separate everything. We decided, because for most of the travel through that area, you only really need one unit in operation. So we decided to have that unit as being, shall we say, the more customer-friendly unit. The second one is what you might call old school. Once the CAA have approved for all airports to be totally done with the new technology, we have an arrangement with the supplier that we will return the old school and replace it with a new one, which will cost us some money because it's a newer unit and different technology.
But I think it's been useful to be laid as a myth, because we asked the States for several million for the whole baggage system, and separately to that, but roughly at the same time, a little bit later, we've upgraded the hand baggage system, and I think people have thought the machine they see costs millions of pounds. It does not. Okay.
So the whole baggage system then is the much more expensive item.
It's out of sight. It also included a lot of construction work,
right,
because it's a very heavy piece of kit. It is not dissimilar to an MRI scanner that you might be familiar that you'd see in hospital. It has a revolving drum. It's a 3D, so a three-dimensional scanner. We originally had in our mind that we would do 2 stages of work, which would have included changing all of the belts and systems that go beyond it, where basically you take that luggage to the aircraft. And we would have also built additional accommodation there. Because we decided to embark on a master plan for the airport, we didn't go ahead with the second stage. So we have spent 5.1 million and returned the rest that was voted back to the States.
right. Okay, thank you.
But are you saying in terms of the cabin baggage screening then that only one of those machines can work at any one time?
No. I said that we predominantly use, as you're going through, the left-hand one, because that's all you need for most circumstances.
But if there's a particularly busy period, if there's a
The
charter
second one
going
comes
out
into
to
use.
Malaga, or if, or maybe in the morning rush where
That's
all
right.
of the
We
red
bring the
lights are
second
going
one
out.
into
We have
use.
it.
I only asked the question because when I went through there a week or so ago, there was only one of them working, but there
Yeah.
were significant queues.
Sorry,
back.
we did have a software problem on the right-hand side one. It was new delivered. There was a glitch in the software, and that software has been replaced. It was a brand new unit, and as you know, commissioning of new stuff, particularly new technology, there was an issue with the software, so we've had that changed.
Anything?
Moving on from that then, a current issue and one that I think is coming up. The taxis are still a problem. I know it's for E&I to deal with licensing and that sort of thing. Could the airport play a role and I was at the airport last night and there's a nice long queue, no taxis. Could the airport play a role in when having staff to spot when there's a queue and no taxis, and have some sort of system for contacting the taxi companies through an app or something, that there's a problem at the airport and they need to get there? Because obviously this is very serious. It's not just, it's absolutely infuriating for us when we get back. But you see business people and families who are coming on holiday just desperate to know what to do, asking you what to do. Can they get a bus? What are they supposed to do?
I think the answer is yes, we can, they can, but the problem is there's been such a fundamental failure of the whole sort of public transport system in relation to taxis. You could contact all the taxi companies and there'd still be no taxis or no drivers available to come up. I know that E&I have done some really good work exploring with CT Plus, a sort of standby. I hope the sale of CT Plus won't undermine that in any way. But I think what we can't do is, I think, keep the airport open until 3 in the morning, well, because nobody can get away because there's security issues and whatever else. But do you want to expand?
No, just I was going to empathise because I was out for supper last night with my daughter's 40th birthday, and we tried to get a taxi at 8:30 and couldn't do so either. So, you know, and I've got a whole range of telephone numbers I can phone personally. So therefore, I don't think that if we had a guy at the airport who had a list of every taxi driver, that he'd be able to solve the problem. It is a problem endemic that he and I need to find a way to
Well,
resolve.
if you could just take on board perhaps that one point, if there's anything you can do. Last point on the airport, I'm being told to hurry up. As a result of the taxi problem, what we've got generally, it's becoming apparent to me, and I'm doing it myself, that people are now parking at the airport for longer because you've just got to have a car there to get back. I was there last Saturday, and the main car park was completely full. We were using the sort of rocky bit at the end to park cars on, because, and even that was full. Could the airport think about, can we extend parking? Can the rocky section be tarmacked at least? Because that would give us about 30 extra places on tarmac.
You won't be surprised that we are evaluating the possibility of putting either multi-deck parking there so that we can use our land more efficiently. People are, as you say, leaving their cars for longer, and it's a valuable income stream for the airport. So we do not deny the fact that it's one way of having what's termed non-aeronautical income. So everything we can do, we have applied to effectively buy the small house that you might, as you're entering the airport on the right-hand side, which is owned by the Housing Authority. I'm not sure which actual part is owned by.
ESS.
ESS. We're in the process of negotiating to A, buy it, demolish it and extend the car park. So we are hoping to solve that. The rough area you talk about has only just come back into our use again. It was denied us for a while, and therefore we're now able to do some work on it. But it wasn't ours until very recently, Colin.
Yeah, it was previously leased to the Hardcore.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's very good to hear. Thank you. I did have some more questions on the airport, but I better stop and go on to the next item. I'm not sure we're going to get through all of this in there.
If we can move on to the dairy.
Right.
It's one of the ones sorry, Simon. Yeah.
The local dairy industry has recently reported its ongoing struggles with rising costs. Mm-hmm. What ongoing plans does STSB have to assist this important industry moving forward?
Okay, well, again, this is one of Stuart's, but what I would say is that actually it's not one of ours in the sense that E&I are responsible for the agricultural industry. Obviously, the dairy plays a very key and important role in that. And from the farmer's point of view, they have two sources of income, I guess. Any support that the state gives for the environmental work that they do, which is not under our mandate, and what we pay them for their milk. But we can obviously pay them for the milk, what we can afford for what we pay from the consumer. So basically, consumer and taxpayer are their two income flows. And over recent years, there's been a very significant move away from taxpayer support for the industry towards it being all the milk consumer. If the same level of taxpayer support was given now as was being in real terms as was given sort of 20 years ago, we'd be talking about £3.something million going from the taxpayer. We're only seeing £1 million at the moment. So that the dairy has had to, I mean, I think we are in between a rock and a hard place, because I think consumers feel they're being charged a great deal for their milk. We've got an old facility which is expensive and inefficient to run, and we can only pay the residual amount to the farmers. So I think we need to talk with E&I about this. But you, again, sorry, Stuart, it's all the ones that you're chairing. That's yeah.
Well, we put forward plans for a new dairy, as you realise, and it didn't manage to get into the delivery phase of the government work plan. So Had it got to the delivery stage, then we would be continuing on with getting to new dairy. The new dairy will be less labour intensive, it'll be more efficient, and therefore we can process milk and make other byproducts more efficiently and cheaply, and therefore we would see that whole unit of business to produce a surplus. Now, whether that surplus then goes to the farmer or whether it then becomes paying back the states for providing the capital is part of what needs to be discussed.
Or reducing milk prices.
Or reducing milk prices. So therefore the surplus has to be decided at a political level. The problem comes, as I'm sure you're aware, is that if the price of milk goes up to too high a level, then pressures might mount as to why sourcing milk from the UK isn't the solution.
Plus we're competing with milk alternatives.
Yeah, sure. But what we're very keen on is making sure that that event doesn't come about. Funny enough, I've only been to one scrutiny hearing before, and that was on this very subject down at the Peninsula, when we were trying to improve the way that the milk industry worked, and it still isn't yet fully fit for purpose, because the island hasn't decided exactly what it wants from its from its farming community.
Yeah.
And that decision, I believe, P&R are working with E&I on a policy of what they want from the industry, what size it should be, what it gives back to the island. We believe it gives back a great deal in respect of the landscape that it supports and the Guernsey breed of cattle that it supports as well, because it is the home of that breed. So we're very clear as what the objectives in mind. However, that comes at a cost. Now, 20 odd million, 25 million is an expensive piece of kit to put in there where we can't give a financial return on. But that is almost the cost of us maintaining that industry.
Yeah.
So the states of Guernsey must decide whether they wish to continue to support that industry and the whole history that goes with it, or whether they can find a better way. The law as it's currently written is that we must take every litre of milk that is provided by our farmers and process it. At the moment, we can't sell all of the milk that comes in because, as Deputy Roffey's mentioned, there are alternatives. There are many people now that are using vegetable alternatives, and who knows, that might accelerate as time goes by.
Can I just, as I said, I've only been here a year, so this is, I've sort of seen the dairy from the side. I think we're trying to subsidise an industry through the price of what is a staple good, and that seems slightly illogical to me.
I agree very much with that. I think the states have to decide what Guernsey's agricultural industry, dairy industry in particular, is for. And if it's for producing excellent milk, which it does, I think it's better than anywhere else. But I don't think that is the main reason. The main reason is that if it wasn't there, we saw in Alderney, when for a few years there was no dairy farming activity, what happened to their habitat there, what happened to their appearance to the island, but also you'd think letting everything go wild would be great for nature, but actually a lot of nature has adapted to grazing, and therefore it would have. And there are people, they may not drink much milk or any milk, but they're still benefiting greatly from the activities of farmers. And therefore, I think there needs to be a discussion over the balance of where the financial support comes from. Because our farmers, there's no way they can compete head on with farmers elsewhere. The size of their fields are tiny, but they got, feudalism has insisted that there's, quite rightly, that there's, we don't want to get rid of them, earth banks every 80 yards or whatever. We got a breed which produces brilliant milk, but compared with a Holstein Friesian, produces it at a lot more cost. Labour is more expensive. Everything is more expensive, and the dairy is in the same position. dairies in the UK not only are massive, they usually deal with one product. You'll have one dairy that does yogurts, one dairy that does butter. You know, we're a cottage industry here, but we're a cottage industry enabling the agriculture industry, which enables the countryside. So I think, although I normally defend the SDSB saying everything needs to be as business-like as possible, I think that it goes beyond just business in this particular case.
But are you saying that the development of the dairy is awaiting the outcome of that work by E&I and P&R on the future of the dairy industry?
It's awaiting deputies to want to put it into the delivery part of the work plan. You could have voted to put it into the work plan as a delivery project. You didn't. Right? So that's where the stumbling block is. Because had you voted it to go into the work plan, we would now be working on the new dairy.
But to be fair, that proposition didn't really appear. When P&R in their first iteration of the government work plan didn't put it in, we cried foul and said, oi, what's going on? They said, oh, don't worry, this won't stop the work carrying on. You can do all the development work and then we can put it in later on. So we get to that stage and we're told, well, yeah, we don't really quite mean that, and what do you want to knock out now in order to put it in? And we're saying we don't particularly want to knock anything out. We're actually saying we think the capital programme will not all be delivered because that's the nature of things. This one can be. We know where we want to put it. We know roughly what the design should be, although we will value engineer that to see if we can reduce the cost. So it is frustrating. And maybe at the next, if we haven't reached an agreement with, I hope we will. There's co-working going on with P&R officers, but if we haven't, we will have to force that debate at the next government work plan.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like, again, quite a long time to wait. There seems to have been a failure of process here. Yes. And let's not forget, a significant amount of money has already been spent on the development of a future dairy.
Absolutely, yeah. But so when you say failure of process, where is the failure?
Well, I think Deputy Roffey has perhaps just explained it in the fact.
It isn't in the hands of the dairy as a failure. It is the hands of those that guide.
Well, one issue that has got deputies' attention is the eye-watering cost. And a lot of us are having difficulty with getting our heads around why it seems to be costing 20, 25, and figures now going over £30 million. That, I think, is what has slowed any interest down in the States. Simply the figure is so big. Is there any way of getting those figures to a lower level?
As far as possible, and of course it will be all revisited and it will be value engineered. But food production facilities do tend to be quite expensive. The hygiene requirements are fairly extreme. In fact, that's one of the things that's driving us now, because environmental health have got questions about how long our current facility can actually... I mean, they do meet all the standards now, I want to stress that, but it's at a great expense and difficulty that that's happening. So, yes, we will try and drive down the cost as far as possible, but I think there's some unrealistic expectation about that. I mean, I hear some figures comparing it with office blocks. Well, office blocks don't have to make anything like the same sort of standards that we do. So they're expecting the same price per square metre is just fantasy land. Simon, you want to...
So I think just where you are with government process on this is that the estimate you had was a work in progress estimate. Is rather, we have stage gates you've got to go through. We weren't at any of those. We were just in the middle of doing the staff work. So when questions were asked, they weren't at an outline business case or situations. That's number one. But more importantly, an amendment was laid by Deputies Roffey and Fairbrush to take a step back, review the work that we have done on the dairy to ensure that that cost estimate and cost base, the scope of what we're proposing in terms of the dairy, size, scale, products is right and reasonable, so that the decision can be revisited next government work plan review, which I think will be June next year, as to whether the project should be moved forward. Obviously, there is a continual delay, and we continually have to keep running the current plant. But that was really the second guess. That was the result of the amendment. So that's the way it will get in again. In the meantime, we're running a dairy that really is running on a shoestring and is very old.
But if you regret the delay, I have to say we do not half as much as we do. Yeah. And look, P&R had an enormous load of strings to pull together to put that first government work plan together, starting from scratch. But if I candid, I have to say it was a major mistake not to have the new dairy in the capital programme. It should have been, and it wasn't, and perhaps we should have absolutely driven it to an amendment at that stage. We were mindful to. We got assured that actually, no, don't worry, the process can continue, and maybe we were soft-soaped to a degree in that extent. I'm sure that wasn't the intention, but it rather feels like it now. in the broader point of view, although the new dairy is essential for the dairy, it is also, I think, getting off a part of what is the hospital campus when you see that what's happening with hospital redevelopment and the value of that campus, I think, is also a hidden bonus that ought to be taken into account.
Sorry, the old dairy site reverting
Yeah,
to the...
yeah. We're reverted to the states to do what they want, but I think they'd be daft not to have it as health-related in some way. Yeah.
Deputy Dyke, was there anything further that you'd want to ask on that?
I was going to ask one question. Has the dairy thought of working with the tourism people to market our cheeses and things in London, along with marketing Guernsey? That the two might go together nicely. And I'm aware that certainly in parts of central London, there are some ferociously expensive cheese shops where our cheese, which no doubt would be ferociously expensive, might actually fit in. Can more be done on that marketing side?
Well, we do have a marketing team in-house, and one of the people I mentioned earlier as a non-states member, unpaid, is a marketing, has a marketing background and strong expertise in that area. One of our troubles is we are talking about relatively low volumes, and therefore, as you know, when you're trying to market something and it's of low volume, a disproportionate amount of the cost is better marketing. The other is that because we are based in Guernsey, we currently sell butter to Waitrose, and it costs us £90,000 a year to get that butter approved for its state of origin. If we started taking other products, it would be the same thing. The regulation on moving foodstuffs off island are significant, and therefore you have to be absolutely certain that you can then gain benefit by so doing. The cheese that we sell in Guernsey, with none of that, I'm sorry to say, but we lose money every time we make cheese, because we are doing it in such small volumes that we can't make money at making cheese. So to then sell it in the UK would be an additional burden of residue testing, etc., and proof of origin, and also the transport that's included. So sadly, we don't have a product that we can market.
The main reason we make cheese really is as a buffer, because, as Stuart said earlier, we have to take all of the milk that is produced. We don't sell it all in liquid milk. It's one of the ways of actually, although it loses money, it obviously loses a lot less and is far better in other ways than pouring any milk down the drain.
The new dairy most probably will not make cheese.
Thank you.
The time is just coming up to 12 o'clock. I'm aware that the mandate of STSB is huge, and there is a lot more ground that we could cover, but we've got through a fair bit today. So I would like to thank all of the witnesses for attending the hearing today and increasing the public awareness of the important work being done by the States Trading and Supervisory Board. The committee intends that these public hearings help to improve the level of public understanding on key areas of government policy, thereby aiding openness and transparency. So thank you all for your participation today. And I formally declare this hearing closed. Thank you very much.